When my oldest was diagnosed with PANS-PANDAS autoimmune encephalitis, and we brought home our 2-year-old malnourished and traumatized daughter from an Eastern European orphanage, my hope to care well for my family went from just a desire to a vital necessity. From milling and baking with my own Einkorn flour, to learning age-old health habits, to trusting God in the valleys of life, I've learned that nurturing and nourishing the family is a holistic quest. Come along for conversations that encourage you to see all the nourishment we were created for in this life. Let's talk. Hey, welcome. This is Krista Dowding of Hilltop in the Valley blog and YouTube channel. And today I wanted to share a little bit about how I got started doing the diet that my family is doing today. So if you are familiar with my work on Hilltop in the Valley blog or YouTube channel, you have probably seen that I use a lot of Einkorn flour in our family's diet. And it has not always been that way. I never knew about Einkorn, when I first was married. It is really something that has developed over probably the last, 10, 12 years, something like that. And before that, I have always been fascinated by nutrition. I have been fascinated that what we put into our bodies can make such a difference for our health, and for the good or the bad of our health. So looking back, when I was a kid, I remember my dad also had an interest in alternative medicine, not just nutrition, but just looking to see scientifically what things might help, because of X, Y, or Z, And my grandma, his mom, had gotten diagnosed with colon cancer. And I always knew as a child, I was told about how grandma had treated her cancer through alternative methods. And in those alternative methods, diet was a huge thing. And so growing up, I just knew that there was this power in what we ate, that it had helped my grandmother conquer her cancer. And so that was the start of me looking into things, kind of alternative health things, and also into nutritional things. But even with that, I did not have that healthy of a diet like a lot of people. I actually, in high school, I ran on our cross country team, but by the time I got to college, I was not running much. And, they call it the freshman 15 once you get into college. I never gained a freshman 15. I probably gained a few pounds, but I did still run a little bit, not nearly as much as I was in high school. But what I did notice happen to my body was a huge shift in my fatigue and my health, and how much I was hungry. And when I was 19, I ended up taking a trip to Europe with some friends. Amazing trip. But while we were there, I did not get to eat nearly as much as I wanted to eat. And when I did, I will say I was not starved at all. That was not a problem. But when we did eat, we would have huge meals. And at that point, I knew that I needed breakfasts. But we would usually have, our normal meals. But for me, I was such a snacker, and I always needed snacks constantly. So when I got back, I thought, well, maybe I can kind of keep eating like this, and I can just do a few meals a day, because that seems like it's probably better for me to not be eating all the time. And I continued to have issues just with always falling asleep in classes. I would be starving by 10 a.m. in my college classes. And I went to the doctor, had some blood tests done, came back that I had hypoglycemia, which is a problem with your blood sugar being too low. Your body ends up sending out too much insulin to take care of all the blood sugar that comes from the food you're eating, which basically signals your body that you need more sugar in your blood to give you the energy for the day. I also it came back that I had PCOS, polycystic ovarian syndrome, and I also had white blood cells were high, oh no, they weren't higher, sorry. My white blood cells were lower than they should have been. I ended up having to schedule a doctor's appointment and to see what all this was, what was going on. And my doctor uh, came in and matter of factly told me, oh, yes, you have hypoglycemia. That means you're going to have to keep candy bars with you and eat often. And you have PCOS, which means that you're probably not going to be able to have kids after you're about 30. So you better have them earlier. And she never said anything about the low white blood cell count. Just not helpful at all. And I went home and kind of cried. and and I said, you know what? I'm going to do something about this. And I prayed about it because that is the biggest thing to me. And I said, God, you know what? I know that you can heal me of this. I have seen you do things for other people. And I know that like I will do what I need to do, but I am going to trust you with this also. And I went on what is called the Maker's Diet. It was from a book called The Maker's Diet, written by Jordan Rubin, who had dealt with horrible health issues. I believe he had Crohn's, I want to say, but just really his body was falling apart, and he ended up looking to a lot of biblical diet type of things that you look towards the history that we find in the Bible, and there really is a lot of prescription for foods that are healthy for us. Anyways, of course, I did this and I ended up getting better. I felt better than I had my whole life, had way more energy. I did not crave sugar anymore, and I just continued on it. Um, at that point, I decided, I just felt so good. There was no reason for me to eat things that I knew made me not feel good. And so it kind of turned into, after a while, it kind of turned into more of a paleo diet. Um, and I had tried to put grains back in, but I found out that I just couldn't after a while. I would have like corn tortillas and those wouldn't be so bad. But if I tried to put things that even gluten-free grains, oftentimes I would just feel bloated afterwards. And so I tended to try and make more baked goods out of almond flour. Um, and I honestly, I began to just depend on almond flour for most things, which I will talk about that, I'm sure, in a later episode as well. Um, but I really, after a while, it just turned into this paleo diet. Um, that worked for a while. In fact, it worked probably for several years. And then when I got married, I had to be on certain antibiotics, and I was also on, well, leading up to my marriage, I had a little bit of toenail fungus that I had had for years since an injury in high school, and I wanted to get rid of it so that I could have pretty toes for my wedding. And I went all the way to getting it taken care of by being put on some really harsh medications. I had to have liver function checked for these medications. And after one of the dosage, it had taken out a lot of my toenail fungus, but I had come off of that with a yeast infection and just could tell that it was ravaging my gut. They asked me if I wanted to go on another prescription for it since it was taking away the fungus, and at that point I could tell my body could not have it. And so I said no, but soon after that I had to be on antibiotics for a couple other things. In fact, in the next couple years, I even had to be on antibiotics that saved my life after having my second son. And so one thing after another, I just, I began to have these things that would mess up my gut a little bit more. And then after I had my second son, and um, also want to add that I was working a stressful job during that time too. And I think stress really does affect us quite a bit more than we even realize. It affects our gut way more than we realize. So I had all these things against me. At that point, that was about the time that I discovered einkorn flour. And I want to say so many, so many diets, especially fad diets or like the new big diet that we find that is the one, will tell us that grains are bad. And honestly, I think there's usually something that they have that kind of backs it up, um, but I don't know that they necessarily always look at the big picture of what is going on. And grains was one of those things. Now, I already said I could not do grains. I figured that out. I had tried to put them back in. Even gluten-free grains were very hard for me to do. And one of the things I figured out was that I was sensitive to yeasted breads. I knew I was sensitive to doing too much sugar or yeast. Um, and when I tried einkorn, I remember telling my husband I knew that there was something to this because I knew that thousands of years ago, grain was not bad. Like it in and of itself, it is not. But there are so many things that have happened along the way that has changed the grains, that has changed our wheat. Um, and I I will go into that in another episode. I'm not going to go totally into that today, but I will say I had the einkorn and it was fine. Um, I think I probably didn't have it very often because it was so expensive. So I discovered it, and I want to say about 5 years later was when I finally committed to einkorn as our family's grain, that was what we were doing. The reason behind that was my oldest son was about 5 or 6 years old. And I think he was 6 when he got diagnosed finally with an autoimmune disorder called PANDAS. Well, there's two different ones there, which um, it is basically an encephalitis of the brain due to some kind of infection that has happened before. So PANDAS is specifically from strep, a strep infection, and the PANDAS comes on acutely about quite a while, 6 months after the illness, something like that, 4 to 6 months. I think it can be as much as like a year later. I'm not sure the exact, but for him, that meant a lot of symptoms that were psychological symptoms, that was mood, behavior problems. Um, he was not the kid that we had known before. All of a sudden, he had horrible behavior problems. I could not transition him out of things. His ADHD was off the charts. He was not learning well. Um, and I will talk about this at a different time too, but I just have to say, like, one of the things with PANDAS, of course, like so many things, it really does come from the gut, and because that is so connected to the immune system, and the immune system was where this all started. So we took him off of gluten pretty quickly into this. We knew that we were not going to be able to do that, and we started on einkorn. Uh, Even so, even after we had done this, so I bought a grain mill that I could grind the flour with, and I got going on this, and then we didn't go to because it was over the internet at that point. This was during COVID. The doctor wanted us to put him on a very special diet because of his PANDAS. And so he could not have so many things to eat. Since then, we have changed that quite a bit. We are now not as restrictive. I do think there are definitely benefits to going on restrictive diets for a time period. That I do know that there are definitely some things that can really aggravate symptoms because it causes more inflammation. Totally get that. Um, but for us, it wasn't helping enough that we completely overhauled his diet. And we definitely do eat very healthy. We are pretty restrictive with foods. And so that has worked for us. But we also had an adoption happen during that time too, an international adoption. Our daughter came home and from Ukraine and was malnourished. She had, what's the name of it? Low iron levels, anemia. I don't know why I couldn't remember that. She had anemia due to the malnourishment. And so, of course, the diet changed a little bit due to that. And so the diet has changed in our family because of different health needs. But, and we did take our son off of Einkorn for a while when we were doing the restrictive diet. But through all that, we have kept Einkorn as the main grain for our family. Now, it wasn't until this last year that I decided that I was going to experiment a little bit more with fresh ground einkorn. Now, up to this point, I would say at first I was grinding our own einkorn, but then I was letting it sit in its container. What's the problem with this? Well, when you grind grain and you leave it there, it actually begins to lose its nutrients, and you can lose, I wish I had the percentages with me. I want to say it's like up to 80% within 72 hours of the nutrients, which is huge, especially when you're using something like einkorn because of its health benefits. Because if you're using it for its health benefits and then you're losing 80% of them, that just does not make sense at all. And so I began to learn a little bit more about how this works with grinding the grain and how you need to use it immediately. And this was after the fact that I had started this blog, Hilltop in the Valley, and I had begun sharing all of these einkorn recipes that I was making. We were really enjoying using the einkorn flour. And during this time of me figuring out all these recipes, I had begun to switch more to all-purpose einkorn flour because, of course, the all-purpose can make much fluffier breads, it can make fluffier cakes and different baked items. And, excuse me, it just was more of a draw for the blog and making recipes for the blog if I would use the all-purpose flour. Well, I don't know if you've noticed, but much more recently, fresh ground flour has come up a lot, and it is being kind of the hot topic item among people nowadays. People are really learning more about that, and they're seeing health benefits in themselves and their families, and so it's becoming a little bit more popular. And so during this time, I found out a little bit more about using my flour right away after I had ground it. And I committed to doing this at the beginning of 2025. So that was right after we had a huge flu bug go through our house. It was around Christmas time, and it had knocked all of us out for about 2.5 weeks. Very, very much not fun. And so I committed to trying whole grain einkorn that had just been fresh ground. And people think, oh my goodness, that sounds so hard. But honestly, fresh grinding it only takes a couple minutes. It is more of the beginning stages of making it habit that is the hard part, not necessarily the actual grinding of the flour. Up from January up until I can't give you an exact month, but we went without sickness in our house for about 6 months. I think we had a cold that went through that just barely hit us. Besides that, though, our health was great. We did not have any more flus or all of the weird COVID stuff or anything like that go through. This was phenomenal for us because um, my son, who has an autoimmune disorder, is so sensitive to getting sick. And that was one of the things that we had noticed when he was very young was his sensitivity to getting bugs. And so the only other thing that I could say, like a couple of the boys and my husband were doing a detox during that time, but we had not done anything else to change our health. In fact, I was not giving them like extra doses of immunity vitamins or, elderberry syrup. I was not doing special things during that time because I really did want to know, okay, is this going to affect them using this grain just after I'm grinding it fresh? And so I also did not prevent them from going out places. We would go to our normal social gatherings, and there would be several a week. In fact, I remember doing more than usual, and nothing would happen. Like in the past, we would have to be so careful going places like the library, going to events where we knew that lots of people were going to be there, big gatherings like family reunion type of gatherings. We would just come home from something like that on the weekend and know that we would probably have sickness. That was how bad it was. In fact, when my son was little, we knew that if he was going to spend a weekend with the grandparents for any reason, he would be sick afterwards. That was the norm. And we didn't question it, as it was just normal for us. We didn't realize how much that might be triggering, or that might be triggered by other problems that he had. Anyways, I just realized I did not mention with my diet change, when I had done my diet change after being diagnosed with hypoglycemia and PCOS, I was able to go back and I did not have hypoglycemia anymore. They did more testing afterwards. Of course, this was at a different doctor. I don't think I ever went back to that doctor again. I was just so done after that. I did not have any hypoglycemia. I have not been tested positive for hypoglycemia since. I still do take care of my blood sugar. I am careful about that. And yes, obviously when that testing was first done, I had a much different diet. I was eating way more sugar, and it's not that way now. I never tested positive for PCOS stuff anymore. Did not have the symptoms. I have not had any problems with pregnancy. Quite the opposite. Besides doing that immediate diet, I came into my family life knowing that I was going to have to fix food like a normal person, because oftentimes we get started on these special diets and they help us out, and then it ends up hindering family life because one person eats one way while everyone else can't eat that way. And so there is no good way to sit around the table and I should say, maybe there is a good way, but it takes a lot of overhauling your routines and your schedules to try and make sure that everybody is getting the food that they can eat themselves. And so we have really worked with the Einkorn flour to use this for our family in a way that everybody loves. In fact, none of the kids, it is quite the opposite from they don't like the Einkorn. Even though it is whole grain, they love it and they ask for it. I am just in awe of how I can make things like pizza with it, and they would have no clue. I do believe that Einkorn flour does have a much better flavor than whole wheat flour. I was fed whole wheat bread as a kid, and there was always to me a little bit of a bite at the end of the flavor. And I don't doubt that, you know, whole wheat can be good for people. I don't doubt that it tastes good. I do think it tastes good. I am not the only person that believes this though. I've had other people try a whole wheat loaf of bread and then try the whole wheat einkorn bread and say that no, this einkorn bread tastes better than that one. And I do believe it is because the einkorn has a little bit of a nutty flavor. It also, um, I don't know if you've looked at my blog or my YouTube videos, you might notice that whole grain einkorn is actually quite light in color and it has this almost yellow tint. And I don't know if that is because of all the vitamin A in it or what, but it does have a very rich tint. And it does not have that bitter flavor that normal whole wheat has. Um, so, how is our family eating today? We are going by trying to get as much protein as possible through grass-fed meat. We are trying to make sure that we have lots of vegetables, especially vegetables that are not extremely high carb. And then we are having a lot of einkorn bread. And I am still fresh grinding the bread because I have seen such a difference in our immune systems. And as you are eating fresh ground flour, I know I wasn't going to do a whole episode on fresh ground flour, but I do want to mention that as you are eating it, it is actually helping your gut because over time it builds up your gut. And I just have to say, I used to take probiotics religiously. That was so after I had switched my diet. And after I had gone through all of those antibiotics and all of that stuff, I had begun to go to more doctors again. And what they did was they gave me probiotics to help. And that was my start with probiotics, with my probiotic stage, except for when I was pregnant with my first. I went off of probiotics at that point. I do think that actually might have done harm. But my gut was just not doing well. And so for years I was on probiotics. I don't want to like be TMI, but really they kept me regular. They helped me to feel normal. And I noticed my mood even would be different if I was not on them. And so they did a lot for me. I do not take probiotics anymore. And I really do think it is because I have switched over to natural food products in order to try and keep my gut healthy. And again, we will do another episode on this. But I really want to say that diet matters. That is one of the biggest takeaways, if I could say anything, is diet matters. Trying to make sure that your kids understand food and how much it helps them or hinders them is important. But at the same time, I really don't want food to be a vitamin. I want to enjoy it. And I think for me, incorporating einkorn bread, I mean, that really has made eating so much more enjoyable. There is something about putting bread on the table, whether it is a loaf of crusty bread or if it is some scones, if it's buttermilk biscuits, whatever it is, there's something about putting bread on the table and feeling like I just got a better meal than I would have gotten at the local restaurant. And we have actually come to enjoy meals at home. I enjoy meals at home way more than most restaurants. But yeah, so I want to just come across that one, it is important to know how much food has an impact on our lives. And two, to know that when we are actually eating the foods that we were created to eat, it is enjoyable. It is not a burden. But how we get there is learning to incorporate the habits that help us and the learning that helps us to know how to make those foods and how to incorporate those into everyday life. That is the part that we don't necessarily have because we are so taught just to use packaged things. And I did too. I did for so long. I just depended on packaged things, especially transitioning from not being a mom to being a mom of one and two and three. And that is something that I have had to reframe my mind for, was to know in my mind that it is okay to spend a little bit of extra time on the front end so that we can enjoy food. So if you are interested in learning more about Einkorn, I do encourage you to go over and look at the blog Hilltop in the Valley. I have free printable Einkorn recipe cards you can check out there. I have some posts just for beginners who are trying to look, into Einkorn to see if this is something that could work for their family. And yes, I do totally understand that certain diets for health problems might not work. I also have some YouTube videos up talking about, is Einkorn for me? Does Einkorn cause inflammation? Answering different questions like that so people can look into it a little bit more. And thank you guys for listening. And I will talk to you again next time on the Nurture and Nourish podcast. Bye-bye. Well, that's it for today. Thank you for coming along for this conversation. If you want to learn more, go ahead and go to hilltopinthevalley.com, or you can check out the YouTube channel at Hilltop in the Valley on YouTube. Before you go, would you do me a favor and go on whatever app right now that you are listening on, whatever platform, and would you leave a good review for this podcast? This is a new podcast, and the way that we grow is by leaving great reviews and by sharing with others. So if you know someone who could benefit or be encouraged by this conversation, please send the podcast to them so that they can listen to it also. Again, thank you for listening, and I will talk to you again soon. Bye-bye. Hey there, I just have to let you know, I am not a doctor, and nothing here is meant to be a diagnosis or a prescription. This is meant for entertainment purposes alone, so please talk to your own provider to help with any medical and or nutritional needs that you may have.